Okay, good evening. I'll call this Monday, August 14th, Crystal Planning Commission meeting to order. City Planner, will you take a roll?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Schultz.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Einfeld Brown.
Present.
Selton.
Here.
Mayor Stoney.
Here.
Buck.
Here.
Strand. Heigl.
Here.
And Sears. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thanks. Next is the approval of the minutes from Monday, July 10th, 2023. Do I have a motion to approve? Will not speak.
I'll make
up.
a
Commissioner Hagel makes a motion. Second.
I'll second.
Commissioner Schultz seconded. Any corrections, additions, subtractions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against? Guys have it supported. Next. Ooh. Gotta win. All of a sudden the mic jumped up.
Oh,
All right, let's turn them down a little bit.
No, it's fine now. Next, order of business, new business. Discuss the amendments to the Unified Development Code. Planner Olson.
yes, I do have a presentation tonight, so I'll kind of go through that. So as you said, this item is to discuss proposed miscellaneous amendments to the Unified Development Code. So as I said, we're proposing miscellaneous amendments. The proposed changes are mainly to clarify existing provisions or practices, correct typographical errors, and make minor adjustments to the standards that are. This is just through a normal administration of the code. On the bottom of that screen there is the proposed schedule. Tonight is the first meeting where you're being asked to discuss these amendments and provide feedback on any changes you'd like to see made before we take it to the next step, which is the city council discussion in a month. After that, the public hearing would be held October 9th at the Planning Commission, and then council first and second readings are October 17th, November 7th, and then after that it goes for publication and becomes effective conceivably in mid-December. So what I've done here is on these next several slides, I've just broken down the staff report into bite-sized chunks, and I thought this might be the easiest way to kind of go through each individual proposed change. Starting off with the town center, I think there's 5 town center changes. The first is dealing with ground floor height of the building. I don't know how much do you want me to go through these, read these, or do you want me to?
Well, that's the question I was going to ask. Are you going to take these individually and we approve them individually?
Yeah, I was going to take them individually, but I don't know if I necessarily need to read everything on the screen. But it's up to you what you want me to do.
It's up to you. It's just a matter of we're going to approve them one by one or as a group.
Well, Mr. Chair, this is just a discussion tonight.
I mean, to get unanimous consent.
Right, I think we're just looking for feedback, whether it's unanimous or not. I mean, that of course makes our job easier if it is, but we're not presuming that. So I concur that we should take these individually so you can provide input on each one. I think, like in this case, Dan is just trying to be respectful of your time, but in this case, the text, the upper box is an excerpt from the staff report. It's pretty short. So I think we'll just use some judgment in whether to read the whole thing, or
Right.
if it's really long, then maybe Dan can abbreviate it, but if that's acceptable to the commissioners.
I was about to suggest something similar. Dan, you should go ahead and read these out in case
Okay,
we maybe misread them unless they get too long.
sure.
Whatever
I
that
think I'll
means.
just paraphrase them, maybe then.
Sure.
So
So
what
the-
you want is our input, negative or positive.
Yeah, just if you say, I don't like that word, or use this word instead,
We're
or
not doing
why are we doing
approval
this?
As a body.
You don't necessarily need to make you don't need to make a motion or anything, as John was saying, you don't need to make a motion or anything on each one, but
Just a discussion.
it's just a discussion. If you just throw out your comments as you think of them.
Mr. Chair, this is a little different process than we've used in the past. We often would first discuss these things with the city council, and then we would come to you for discussion or even hold the public hearing. I think as staff, we learned that that was not the best approach, and the planning commission deserved to have the first crack at these from staff before we brought them to the city council for discussion. So tonight's meeting is sort of an extra discussion for the planning commission before we even discuss it with the city council. So that the sequence is a little different, but we think this is more respectful of the planning commission's role than the way we had done these in the past.
It's a good idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Commissioner Schultz.
So is it fair to say these amendments are similar, or are the amendments that we didn't pass earlier in the year that we're taking?
Some of them are.
Okay.
There's some new ones as well. And not all the ones that we did last year are here, so.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
These can be characterized as the non-controversial ones from the UDC amendments of 2022. We may bring others back to you on a more individual basis that are more contentious potentially and need a lot more in-depth discussion, but this was sort of the easy batch of ones that we felt made sense and really weren't the subject of the objections last year. So we felt these were the right starting point. And then there'll be more to come later as we progress over the next year or so. But these were the low-hanging fruit, as they say.
So when they go back to the city council for a discussion, our input as far as negative or positive will be expressed to them?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Everybody understand that? You got the floor.
Okay. Okay, so this first one here is, in the town center, we realized that, how would I phrase this? This regulation was from a model ordinance, and the model ordinance assumed that there would always be ground floor residential in an apartment building situation, because that's the way a lot of cities require it. Like the city of Minneapolis requires ground floor residential in all their apartment buildings, I believe. So we used this model ordinance, but we realized that not everybody will be doing ground floor residential. We don't require it. So this alteration here is clarifying that 12-foot first floor height for a building is only applicable if there is a non-residential use on that ground floor.
Any questions? Seeing none, go ahead.
Okay. The second one here is similar to that. We have this glazing requirement, which is basically glass windows on the first floor, the ground floor, I should say. It's the same kind of thing. We had we have a glazing requirement of 50% for that ground floor. And it's from a model ordinance, thinking that is going to be non-residential use. So this clarifies that if they don't have a non-residential use, then only it should have the same glazing requirement as the upper floors, instead of having a 50% requirement.
So then are we requiring the upper floors be residential, or can the upper floors be commercial as well?
Well, I guess that's not a scenario that we had thought of. To me, it would be unusual to have say, for example, are you saying that the whole building would be not non-residential, or there would be?
Yeah, what happens if it's a two-story, completely non-residential? Like, you can
Oh.
see like the old Coles building off of, that's a two-story, I think it's a home furniture center now or something like that, or something else, but it's 2 stories and they're both commercial. The entire thing is commercial.
Well, I think the way this language is written, just trying to think here. It seems like if it's entirely non-residential, then it would be 30% on each floor.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Sutter.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. It occurs to me that Commissioner Maristani raises a very good point in that perhaps we should rewrite this to say that non-residential floors shall have a minimum glazing of 50% and residential floors shall have a minimum glazing of 30%.
That would make it definitely clear.
That way it wouldn't matter.
Yep.
You know, they could have 2 floors of office and 3 of residential or something
Yep.
above it, right? So that way, the key, what we're really trying to get at here is residential floors don't need as many windows as commercial floors.
Okay.
Any further questions?
No.
Move
Okay.
on. Move on.
Okay. Let's see here. This is a requirement in the town center area. We're just trying to break up what we call the super blocks, these large areas where there's no street connections. So right now we have language in there that says there's certain areas of the town center that we want a new street in when the area redevelops, when that block redevelops. What this is saying is that we would also accept a pedestrian connection instead of a street. It doesn't have to be a street.
Any questions?
Which super blocks do you want to break up?
The Crystal Gallery Mall is one. That's that whole area. And then also the Crystal Shopping Center, which is across West Broadway. There's also an area near the Minnesota Grinding. It's just north of the Minnesota Grinding building, if you know where that is. It fronts on Douglas, a little bit north of the the fire station. It's 12 acres, I think.
Mr. Sutter.
Commissioners, to clarify too, I mean, the town center district would apply if there's redevelopment. So as a matter of policy, the city isn't, targeting the Crystal Gallery Mall or the shopping center for redevelopment in the sense that we're making it happen. But if those mall owners want to sell to a developer to redevelop and reuse that land for something else, then they would have to put in the street or pedestrian connection. So we're not requiring that those existing commercial properties go away, but we're saying if they do go away, then we don't want these massive blocks anymore. We want to break up the super blocks, is the phrase that Dan used. But it's redevelopment dependent.
And the idea of putting it in the UDC is so that developers are sort of forewarned that this is a design feature that we're looking for if, as John said, if they do redevelop. So it's not a surprise to them.
Why don't we word this in a way that would make it so that the blocks that they can build on are only so big, but they need to have public access through the block? You know what I'm saying? Because I'm looking at the pictures on pages 53 and 52, and it shows kind of where the roads currently go or where access is. But let's say when you redevelop that area, it doesn't make sense for the road to go through there, or there ends up being a parking and then you want a pedestrian to go through. So it would make more sense to piecemeal what size buildings we want instead of saying, or I don't know if that's right, but like I said, I was looking at page 53 and 72, and it kind of shows you currently using the current driving areas as places where you would have pedestrian locations or bike, whatever, or sidewalks. But I don't know. I have to think some more.
Commissioner Mayorstein, or Commissioner Chair and Commissioner Mayorstein, that's what I'm trying to say. I think, I'm not sure if this answers your question, but it does say the city in both instances, this is the city will consider alternate locations that achieve this intent. So we're not, that language doesn't lock us into this exact location
Okay.
for a new street or new pedestrian connection, but again, we're just trying to put on future developers on notice that we want something in this area. And we don't necessarily have to have it right exactly where the yellow lines are, but we want something in that area. And
Okay, then maybe we should change the wording, alternate pedestrian connections that achieve this intent, because I know a lot of the stuff in this is making sure that we're using similar language throughout. So I think that since we want pedestrian connections, the city will consider alternate pedestrian connection locations that achieve this intent would be a better way to phrase it, so that we don't have two things that are the same thing.
okay. So instead of the word street.
Street, I would say pedestrian connection locations.
But isn't this saying that pedestrian connections are welcomed as well as streets for these situations? Rather than saying we'd prefer pedestrian connections over streets?
We could say pedestrian connections or streets.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be,
I think that's what it said.
Commissioner,
Mr. Chair, it occurs to me too that perhaps we should change the title of figures 10 and 11. Just say, instead of just location of new street or pedestrian connections in those two figures, we should instead say something like conceptual location.
yes.
Because these maps, these aerial maps are not at a sufficient scale. I mean, that's something that will be figured out as a developer gets into more detailed design. I would almost want to use the word hypothetical. I mean, they're not even really conceptual. At least with a concept, you start to play with, like, here's your building footprint, here's where the access points are, here's the way the building works on the site. So, yeah, I don't know, maybe I think we need to work on that a bit, but I think we need to qualify that, something about hypothetical or conceptual.
Yeah, I mean, if you want developers to see that we're open to different ideas, then you need to make it look like we're open to different ideas in the wording.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, Dan and John, is there a formula of any kind that would determine building square footage and when you need to have street or pedestrian connections based on that square footage? Is there a maximum limit of a footprint, and then you have to insert something like a connection?
I don't know about footprint, but oftentimes, at least theoretically, the block perimeter, there are block standards. The block perimeter can't exceed 800 feet, and the block can't be more than 200 feet wide, or less than 200 feet wide, more than 400 feet wide, or something like that. They'll have dimensional requirements that apply to the block and the building, the new block, the smaller block, so that the blocks can't be too big. We made a conscious decision not to get that specific here because we want to give developers a chance to be creative. Especially since in Crystal's case, they're not starting from scratch or a single really large site. They're starting with, the largest single parcel is the Crystal Shopping Center, and even that is only, I think, about 25 acres.
Sure.
So, whatever they do, they're going to have a lot of flexibility to set up their new pattern of blocks and buildings. And that's why we made a conscious decision not to get specific. But other cities do have standards like that govern how big each block can be.
I see why you kept it less specific in this case, and especially too, the properties in question that we're looking at are in no way resemble what you could call a standard block.
That is definitely true.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay. Parking lot screening. This is something I learned from the sand project. just as, this just basically says, it relates to screening requirements within the town center districts may be altered if driveway visibility would be impaired. So the language there is, just if these, what the intent here is to try to not require landscaping if driveway visibility would be impaired. So they could suggest another alternative to screening in that area.
Any questions?
Do we have driveway visibility defined as to what that is?
Good question.
I'm not sure if it's, I mean, we do have visibility requirements. I'm not sure that they would necessarily, I would say in this instance, we probably don't.
We probably want to add a definition then, just because we want to make it clear to everyone what that means. Because my driveway visibility versus somebody else's version of what is visible is completely, or can be completely different as to how much space they think they need to see.
Right, and every driveway could potentially be different too.
Yeah.
And, you know, the angle of the street and the driveway,
Depending on how they connect, yep.
elevation. Good luck writing that standard.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I think we do have our site triangle regulations that apply at public and street intersections, but they don't necessarily, well, some do apply to driveways at sidewalks. So we can take a look at that and maybe reference that section of city code. But with the TC district, I mean, we don't require the screening in other districts like we require for redevelopment in the TC district or the TCPD. So it's all being triggered by that requirement that if you're gonna have a parking lot, you have to have, you know, near the street.
I mean,
Or you have to have screening, but if you have screening, it can't be in a way that impacts driveway visibility. And maybe there we can reference the site triangle, the dimensions in the site triangle section.
Yeah, but I'm also thinking about the pedestrian crossings we're going to have through these areas, and I would hate someone to accidentally get hit because they weren't visible because of the way the driveway was, or they, you know, just because of that.
I think the site triangle rule for driveways maybe does reference sidewalks. We'll check that out, but I think we get there needs to be some clarity here for both approaches to roads as well as approaches to public sidewalks. So we
Or
can.
bike paths,
Bike path, yeah.
whatever, because bikes can go pretty fast, and I don't want any bikes to get hit.
I don't think this will be coming up a lot, but.
I know it won't,
Because in the town center, the parking lots are behind the building or maybe in some instances on the side. And that's what happened with the sand project. There was a little bit of parking on the side of the building. And that's where, and they wanted to have, their landscaping was going to be, in my opinion, it was going to prevent or cause problems in the future with visibility, so.
All that said, I think it's a good point, and we'll look at our site triangle rules as a basis for how we define this.
Okay.
Any further questions? On to the next.
Okay. This next one here is, this would, I can talk about all the setbacks here, but the one that I wanted to focus on here for the town center was just to increase the rear setback from 3 feet to 5 feet. There's no magic formula here for this, but it's just in discussing this, 3 feet seemed pretty close, and so we feel comfortable with 5 feet as a rear setback.
Any comments?
No.
Commissioner
I have
Marsani?
comments about the reducing from 15 feet to 10 feet. Is that going to have any effect on the police being able to visibly view down those alleyways and make them safe? Or, you know, because we're taking an alleyway and we're making it smaller, it seems like more shenanigans could go on in an area that's kind of darker and more hidden than something that's more open and exposed to the light. So I was just wondering why we were decreasing from 15 to 10.
That's under the commercial for the corner side, is that what you?
Well, it's the side under R2,
Oh.
and then it's also the corner side under commercial.
Right, okay, for the R2,
Yes, the side lot decreases from 15 to 10, you have it going, and then from the corner side, also from 15 to 10.
right. For the R2, I think we just felt like 15 was excessive, because this is, typically it's a two-family dwelling, and so it's not much bigger than a single family. And the single family has a 5-foot setback. And then right now we have for say like a duplex, we would have a 15-foot side setback for an interior lot. That just seemed excessive, so we minimized it to 10. We're proposing to minimize it to 10 for that reason. Because it's very similar to it's more similar to a single family than it is to say like an apartment building.
All right, like I said, I would just talk with the police department about this to see if it's something that they are comfortable with, especially in the commercial area, as far as crime and things that they see. If things happen less with more spacing between the buildings versus more when you decrease the spacing.
Okay, so just to clarify, for the R2, it doesn't sound like you have an issue with
No,
that.
the R2 would probably be fine if you're thinking that that's just going to be in current R2 areas.
Yep.
I'm thinking about in the commercial areas, because I don't want to see them, end up blighted and drug trading and all sorts of trafficking or stuff going on in narrow alleys, because that's not good stuff.
Right. I'm not sure if I completely understand.
Okay, all I want you to do is ask someone in the police department if they notice, because I'm not a police expert or a crime expert, if they notice that buildings closer together than 15 feet on their sides have more crime than, because I don't have the stats for the city on this, than ones that are 15. Because a 15-foot area is basically open to the light. When you start getting narrow, 10 feet, that's like less than 2 of me, if I'm lying head to foot. And so all of a sudden you get your dumpsters and everything in there, and you can't really see in the alleyway. There's a lot of hiding that can go on, and more unsavory things can happen in alleyways that are more hidden than ones that are more exposed. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah.
For understanding. So a corner side, this is for a corner lot. So let's say, I'm just trying to think of an example. You have two streets. One street is called front, and the other street is called side. So that's a corner lot. The one that's labeled front and is the shorter of the two sides, that would be, in this case, under commercial, that would have it's actually not on there, but it's 10 feet. So what this is saying is for the other side, it's currently 15-foot setback for the building, but it's proposed to be reduced to 10 feet on that side. So the alley doesn't necessarily come into play for this.
Okay.
If I may,
Am I misunderstanding?
just to clarify, we're saying, this is referring to the setback, of course, is referring to the distance from the referenced side of the building to the referenced lot line, and is irrespective of the actual alley or streetway.
Okay.
Right, yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah,
What,
Director Center.
one way to think about this is, for some reason we don't understand, we originally required a 15-foot setback from the side street on a corner lot, but only a 10-foot setback from the street that's the front of the lot. Why should they be different? They should be the same. A street is a street in terms of the building setback. So in commercial districts, we're just harmonizing the side street with the front street on a corner commercial lot. So this doesn't impact the interior side lot line at all. This has to do with just on corner lots. It's making it the same for the front versus the side street.
Exactly, yes.
And so then most of our commercials are on like streets that have both directions and they're not alleyways, or?
I'm trying to think of an example of one on an alley. Well,
The Bass Lake Road Strip across from Becker Park, that has a city alley behind it. That's probably the only commercial alley I can think of. Well, and the alley extends all the way from Elmhurst Avenue west to, it goes through the Sherburne access point west to where Nakoma Shoes is. That's actually a city alley. That's the only commercial alley I can think of off the top of my head in Crystal.
So then we want the buildings to be able to go closer to the residential there? That doesn't make.
No.
No.
Yeah.
No, the setback would be reduced by 5 feet in some cases. But that strip you're talking about, the buildings go right up to the alley.
Very close, yeah, they're legally non-conforming anyway.
Yeah.
They don't meet their, well, some of them are. So that's the rear setback, which
That's not the side.
we're not changing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, the alley would be a rear setback in that case. I guess the side street would be Elmhurst on the east end of that block, which is actually a city parking lot right at the corner. But if there was a building on that city parking lot, that building could be within 10 feet of the property line along Elmhurst, which is basically where that sidewalk is along Elmhurst. So picture it 10 feet back from there. And also, well, this is in the TC core district, so this doesn't even really apply there because it's not just straight commercial. So now that I think about it, we actually don't have any commercial alleys that are in the commercial zoning district where there are alleys. Because that strip we're talking about is in the TC.
Yeah, it's in the TC
core district. So,
yeah.
Okay.
Any further questions or comments?
I'm good. Oh, wait.
So are you saying the front
Mr. Schultz.
setback, thank you, the front setback for each of these areas, these zoned areas is 10 feet? That's not included?
Yeah, it's not being changed, so it wasn't included on the
Okay.
slide. I believe I know it's 10 for commercial industrial. It's different for the R2, R3, R1, 2, and 3 is different. TC is different. So there are different, we're not changing any, to answer your question, we're not proposing to change any of the front setbacks.
I was just wondering if you knew what they were. 'Cause
Yeah, I could look them up.
Surprised, another day.
Okay,
Any further comments? If not,
okay.
next.
Here, this is a definition of gross density. It's just adding a definition that we don't have. It's, by practice, this is how we define it, or how we have defined it for many years. So it's just putting something into the UDC that we have been done by practice.
Director Sutter.
and Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I should point out too that this is the way Met Council determines density. They call gross density, they include all of the public right-of-ways that are serving the development. So it's basically to keep our code apples to apples with the way Met Council calculates density, which is something we need to do.
Need to have a standard, yeah. Benchmark.
Any further comments? Seeing none, next item.
This is probably the easiest one. It's just, maybe I'm being too picky here, but I'm just trying to consistently use the word multiple. Sometimes it says multi, and sometimes it uses this as multiple, and so I'm just trying to use very consistently so there's no doubt what we're talking about.
Any questions?
So it should always be multiple.
Yes.
Good.
No further questions, move on to the next.
Okay. This is just a change to our definition of specialized care facility. It would just delete the term housing with services establishment. That phrase was eliminated by the state of Minnesota in 2021, and so it's not, now they use the term assisted living facility. So that word, that term is already in that definition, so we're keeping that and just deleting the term housing with services establishment, which no longer has any meaning according to the state, so.
Any questions or concerns? I'll move on to the next.
Okay, this one here relates to, deals with floor area relating to alcohol sales. Let me read the actual language here. It's just deleting a use-specific standard for restaurants to say that no more than 30% of the total floor area should be occupied by sale of liquor, wine, or beer. If they wanted to exceed it, they had to get a conditional use permit. But we have found through administering the code over several years that this is rarely, if it's ever been gotten to that level. So we thought, well, if no one's ever exceeding it, why have it in the code? So.
But is it not exceeded because it is in the code? I mean, this is a chicken and egg type thing here.
I have never had anybody, in the 8 years I've been here, I've never had to tell somebody they had to get a CUP. And I think John's been here 25 years, and I think that he has had the same experience, so.
Mr. Chair, that's correct. I think part of the issue too is how do you determine where the alcohol sales ends and the restaurant use begins? They're all part of the same business. People have their drinks at their table. So we try to interpret this by looking at just kind of the bar area. Well, that's almost nowhere is the bar area going to be 30% of the whole establishment. So it just, I think, and wherever you go, whether cities have this standard or not, usually the bar is a small portion of the total square footage. And so we just, it seemed A, like an unnecessary rule, and B, how, you know, it really depends on how you calculate it. And it'd be better just, I mean, if we allow restaurants and they can sell alcohol, you know, they're all permitted uses anyway. We felt between those two reasons, it didn't make sense to keep it in the code. Also, more and more cities have been getting rid of these rules. Minneapolis used to very famously have limitations that not only looked at square footage, but also looked at the percentage of sales that came from alcohol versus other things. Mm-hmm. And that was even more of a nightmare to administer, because now you're digging into their business records, which just kind of makes my skin crawl. Like, it's not, I don't want us to do that as government employees, frankly. So, yeah, and more cities are getting rid of those kind of old rules that have been around for many decades.
Yeah.
This predates the UDC as well, so.
I can see the difficulty in trying to measure something like this in a restaurant. My question is, this is not strictly to TC anymore. This would be wherever there is a restaurant, regardless of its zone.
Correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Schultz?
So am I hearing this just came about as type of a community standard, and that's how it made it into the rules to begin with?
I'm not sure where it came from. It was in the UDC, or it was there prior to the UDC. It was just carried over into the UDC in 2018. I don't know how long it's been there. But.
Yeah, it was something like this, maybe not this exact standard, has been in our zoning code for as long as I can remember, and it probably originated from a model ordinance from the 1970s or something. Again, just like Minneapolis, a lot of cities had rules like this, and they were well-intentioned, but they just weren't really, you couldn't really enforce them or measure them, and more and more cities are getting rid of them. So this is in the UDC, but it was a carryover from a zoning ordinance from many decades ago.
Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, move on.
Okay. This is relating to waste control, waste container enclosures, which I would call dumpster enclosures typically. This is just spelling out practice. We didn't specifically have in our accessory use table something labeled waste container enclosures, dumpster enclosures. So we wanted to put that in there just to make it clear that we do require them, or we do allow them in these different zoning districts. And then also the bottom there, that's just screening requirements for, clarified screening requirements for the dumpster enclosures.
Any questions or comments?
Are they,
Mr. Marsani?
are they required in R1 districts?
No,
Or is it just a permit, it's, so P is permitted use?
Yeah, they're
not
allowed.
required. Okay.
they're allowed, and most people don't have them in the R1 or R2.
Any other questions?
No.
Move on to the
Okay.
next.
Outdoor dining and sales. This just clarifies that a CUP is only required if the duration exceeds the limits for a temporary use. So the language there is,
180 days.
I believe so, yeah.
108, if you're wondering,
Yep.
how long is a temporary use? 180 days.
Dining is 270. and
Sorry,
then-
270.
And then outdoor sales is 180, so.
This was put under smoking ban. This language was put in for smoking.
I don't know if this was really ever really clear prior to the UDC, but when we were creating the UDC, we spelled out, we created a whole new category called temporary uses, which we didn't have before. It was sort of implied, but it wasn't specifically described. And so I think we're just trying to find language here that really clarifies very clearly that if you exceed these temporary limitations, then you have to apply for, and you want to continue, you would have to apply for a CUP.
Okay, any other questions? Commissioner Marsani?
Well, based on what you said, I think that the city does need to look into what we're going to do with outdoor smoking in the city, especially in areas that are right next to public walkways. Because I don't know about everybody else, but the smell of marijuana is not exactly pleasant to me, and I don't like to smell it. So we should definitely be thinking about those things.
Are you talking about smoking of any
Of any,
cigarettes?
I mean,
Cigarettes as well?
cigarettes, I, as a kid, grew up with it a little bit, but marijuana is definitely a new smell for me that I am not exactly thrilled with, so.
I disagree entirely.
Okay, see, and I mean, we're gonna have all the spectrum, so.
Well,
Director Sutter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the city council tomorrow night is actually going to be considering a ban on smoking. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a ban on smoking marijuana in city parks and on streets and sidewalks in the city. So while we can't, I would guess we can't or maybe shouldn't specifically target marijuana smoking on private patios if we allow tobacco smoking. Certainly, it's within the city's purview to not allow it in public spaces such as street sidewalks and parks. And the big, I guess, the difference with the council had this discussion about, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana. Well, marijuana is not physically addictive, but it's certainly intoxicating. Nicotine, tobacco is definitely physically addictive and medically harmful, but not intoxicating. And alcohol is kind of the worst. It's got all three. It hits all three of the bad buttons, right? But the fact that marijuana smoke travels in a way that alcohol does not and is intoxicating, I think, is the city council hears those concerns, and we'll be talking about them tomorrow night and possibly taking action.
Commissioner Schultz.
I would include tobacco, cigarette tobacco in that as a citizen. It's nauseating. It's harmful. And if it's in a public space, it shouldn't be able to be, if you don't let somebody do alcohol or marijuana, smoking, it's a smoke, it's harmful.
Well, why not go after strong perfume then? It's the same thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
I work in a medical building, and you're exactly right. There's no smoking of any kind on public property, and you don't wear scents.
I think it's a slippery road to try and pick and choose which aromas you're going to ban in public spaces.
And could we,
Harmful ones.
I think
Define harmful.
Mr. Sutter is making the point, though, that they're not just aromas, they also have effects beyond just the smell. And that's what we're trying to,
So are we trying to get rid of scents that are offensive or things that we deem are unhealthy or harmful?
I think we're trying to give people choices so that they're not automatically inundated with things that they're not comfortable with.
I think that gets awfully gray.
Commissioner Schultz.
Secondhand
I agree.
tobacco smoke is proven to be harmful.
As well as diesel truck smoke.
Yeah,
and could this be,
We know the smoke.
could this be included
We've
with,
lost control.
the patios that are attached to restaurants and stuff like that for not smoking in those areas? Or are we barking up the wrong tree on that one?
Well, just as a side note, I don't think that the UDC is the place to regulate smoking of any type, but if it should be done, it's going to be done, it sounds like it's being considered anyway, in other areas of the city code, but I don't believe it should be addressed in the UDC, which is what we're talking about tonight, but.
I was talking about the marijuana type smoking and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think these new laws relating to cannabis, I don't necessarily think that we'll have huge changes well, maybe, I shouldn't say that, maybe we might have some small changes in the UDC, but it's not going to be, I think the major changes are going to be outside the UDC in other parts of the city code, so.
Commissioner Hagel.
The last time I read anything about smoking marijuana, the state is still considering where it's going to be allowed and where it is not going to be allowed. Now, are the cities going to be getting ahead of this, or should we wait until whatever the state guidelines will come out on?
The state agency that's going to administer this has yet to be created.
Pardon me?
The state agency that's going to oversee this has yet to be created.
That's what I mean. But we're trying to do something before that is really set up.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think I can
Director
shed some light on this, thank you. So there are many things about the state administration of cannabis legalization that are not known yet because the agency has not been created yet.
Right.
However, there are things in the law that cities clearly can restrict, and one of those is the consumption of marijuana in streets, sidewalks, parks, and places like that. So the city has that authority, just as we can prohibit people from drinking alcohol in streets, on sidewalks, and public parks, which we also prohibit, if I remember correctly, previous council discussions. So there are some areas where cities clearly have authority now under the law, even though the state agency hasn't been created. When we go from regulating use in public spaces, public property, to private property, that's where the city's powers are much more limited. And I think, as Dan was pointing out, those types of things, those types of questions, we can't do that in the UDC. If you're going to have an outdoor patio and you want to allow smoking on it, the zoning ordinance is about land use. We're not going to tell you what you can smoke on it. So.
Any further questions?
Okay.
Move on to the next.
Tree size requirements. This is just a change to the size of the smaller trees, understories, ornamental trees. Instead of requiring them to be 2 inches at planting, which is what the overstory trees are required to be, this reduces that to 1.5 inches because they are typically a smaller tree. They're intended to be a smaller tree. So that's why I'm suggesting that we have a smaller size requirement.
Any questions or concerns? No. Commissioner Hagel.
Yeah, on that argument of a smaller tree, when you talk to the Minnesota University over there, botanist, he was saying that the fatality rate increases with the size of the tree. So now you're saying, okay, 2 inch, and some of these ornamental trees, our winters are really harsh. They're strong, but they're not that strong. So what you're starting out with is something smaller. So now is the death rate on those trees going to increase? I don't know, but it's something to consider.
I just had an,
Commissioner Schultz.
I just had an arborist out to my house about planting trees in the size, and they actually recommend planting a smaller tree because then the root ball is able to acclimate better into the soil. Instead of having a larger root ball, it has less chance of success
But the
because
difference between a 2 and 1.5.
it's all about
is
the root
very,
ball.
they're both the same size.
Yeah, it's all about the root ball and,
Yeah.
and the
It's
health of
about
the
the
tree's
same
gonna
size.
survive.
But the survival rate of that tree is what I'm questioning.
Should we consider 1 inch? Dig into it a little bit?
Doesn't mean you have to go down.
I think he's.
Commissioner
I
Gonzalez.
mean, to go down to 1.5.
On this one, I would recommend talking to the city arborist to see what he has noticed with regards to planting trees in our area. If it is when we go down to 1.5 inch, fine, that's great. But if it needs to be 2 inches and we get a better success rate, maybe we should keep it at 2 inches?
Sure, I can speak to, we don't have an arborist so-called, but we do have someone who is pretty knowledgeable about trees. He helped me create the approved tree species list.
You have a forester, right?
We do not any,
We used to.
we used to, yes.
Yeah. Got rid of it.
Commissioner Schultz.
You can talk to an arborist for free, and I would recommend an arborist.
Okay,
Because I've learned a lot from an arborist about tree survival, especially with the drought.
Commissioner.
I didn't do extensive research on this, but I just was kind of seeing a pattern of that ornamental trees were smaller when they were first planted in a lot of cities, and even in the places where they were buying them, they were smaller than an overstory tree. So I thought, well, maybe we should make this less than 2 inches. But I can do some more research on that and see if we should just keep it at 2.
Director
That's what I'm
Stott.
hearing, right? You might want to keep it at 2 is what I'm, okay.
Well, I'm also hearing though that smaller caliper trees often have a higher survival rate, correct? That's not what you said?
You got, it's.
But I've heard that from others. That's what I think
Yeah, she's saying that.
Commissioner Scholl said. So we need to do some more research on this, but we might go down to 1 inch, or we might say a certain amount for large species trees and a different one for ornamental or something. We definitely need to do more research.
Yep.
Good news is the city council won't see this for a month, so we have some time to dig a little deeper into this subject.
Along with that research, look at what what type of trees, whether you classify them as ornamental or et cetera, what ones are affected more by that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last few words?
What I'm saying is check the species of the tree, which has a better survival rate, instead of saying just ornamental, because ornamental covers a pretty wide area of different trees.
He's just saying that certain trees, 1.5, 1 inch might be great, but certain trees, other trees, 1 inch, 1.5 inch will die, just like you see on Botany.
Okay.
Any further questions or concerns? Now move on.
Okay. This is relating to parking lot screening. This is just generally citywide. The idea here is that if there is if the parking lot is set back double what the minimum is, or there is no adjacent residential use, that screening of that parking lot would not be required.
Any questions or concerns? Seeing none, move on.
This relates to the landscaping requirements. We have this requirement that we have this requirement for landscaping around the parking lot itself. So this really was, in my opinion, it wasn't real specifically defined. And so this first definition is to, or first revision, I should say, is to define the area that's considered where the landscaping, what the area around the parking lot is considered to be defined as for the landscaping requirement. The second change there is to just refer to tree size requirements that we just looked at, or that area of the landscape ordinance. Rather than, this was an internal conflict because it had a different standard for tree height. So we're just going to refer back to the other section for tree height.
Any questions or concerns? Seeing none, move on to the next.
This relates to roof-mounted mechanical equipment, and it clarifies that we don't require screening for roof-mounted mechanical equipment on a single or two-family house dwelling.
Right.
Yeah. Which is the standard practice, but I think it inadvertently didn't get put in there when we were creating these screening requirements for the UDC.
Any questions or concerns? Seeing none, move on to the next one.
This is relating to driveway access for parking lots. You can see here from the drawing that we require that there be a 20-foot, I would call it a 20-foot setback from the right-of-way to allow for stacking. This added language is only for those parking lots that are accessed from what I would call a busier street, a collector, or the term is collector arterial. So this would not be applicable to just a local street where there's very little traffic coming. So it's much less of an issue. So.
Any questions or concerns?
No.
Seeing none, move on to the next.
This relates to compact vehicle parking spaces. Right now we have a minimum number of spaces, and we have a maximum. And this, we didn't really, just thinking about it, we didn't really see a reason to have a minimum number of compact vehicle spaces. That's actually helpful to reduce the size of a parking lot, is to have smaller spaces. So we didn't see any reason to have a minimum in that respect. So this language deletes the minimum, but it keeps the maximum.
Any questions or concerns? Commissioner Marisani?
I just want to make sure that, that you still have to have full-size spaces for the parking lot, even if you get rid of, because the wording here is this paragraph provides for the establishment of compact vehicle spaces as an alternative to full-size park spaces. So I just want to make sure they have the full-size spaces and they don't just turn their parking lots into basically compact spaces all over.
Right. I didn't provide this language, but I can read it from the existing UDC. This says, the maximum here is 20% of spaces in any single parking lot may be dedicated to compact parking spaces.
Okay.
So you can't have there's a maximum of 20% of all of the spaces that could be compact. The other 80% have to be the full size.
All right, thank
We
you.
also allow for what's called low turnover, but we have yet to have had anybody take us up on that offer. But that's just, it is what it sounds like, where these are spaces where somebody's parking there for the entire day, for example.
Okay.
Maybe it's an employee area of the parking lot where the employee is parking there the entire day. Those could be a little smaller than a full size as well, but the language I just read to you is for compact, so a maximum of 20%.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or concerns? Seeing none, move on to the next.
Okay, this is fairly simple. Just for the creation of parking lots, we have this little disclaimer, I would call it, at the end of the parking standards, that if there's something in the parking standards requirements that just doesn't work for a specific site, then in this case, the transportation engineer could suggest an alternative, which would be approved by city staff or the city engineer. But here, this just adds that, this study could also be done, or this alternate could also be proposed by a civil engineer as well. It doesn't have to be a transportation engineer.
So then they both have the basic same background to be able to do this kind of work?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions and concerns? Seeing none, move on to the next.
Okay, this is just a revision to our park dedication cash requirement. You see on the top there, that we do require, what the requirement is for cash payment for a subdivision. This is kicked in when a subdivision happens, except for lot consolidations. Those are exempt, but for a subdivision, those are the amounts that the person would pay. We do, however, this new language would take into account if the subdivision had previously been a commercial or industrial use, then we could take into account that portion of the property and calculate the fee for that, what the fee would have been for that area. Does that make sense?
Any questions or concerns?
We could take in the prior use of the property as a commercial industrial use.
Right.
We did this with the 34th and Douglas, the townhome projects. That used to be a gas station, of course. There was also a commercial building there as well. So this was outlined in the staff report, but we reduced what they would have had to have paid for the park dedication because of the prior use.
Any further questions or concerns? Seeing none, move on to the next.
Okay, and then just lastly, some changes to the sign code. First is that this is the practice that it's been practiced, but it's never been officially outlined or clarified in the UDC, is that menu board signs, we don't require them to get a sign permit. Specifically, menu boards for drive-through restaurants is what the standard is.
Any questions or concerns?
Well, that makes sense, because those types of signs are around the back of the building at the drive-through, and they're not public-facing, as it were.
Yes. And I think another reason is also they're not necessarily advertising. It's more of just informational.
Right.
I think that was a reason that the staff in the past never required a sign permit for that type of sign.
Makes sense.
Did the Pizza Ranch need one? Because I know for a while before they left, they had that drive-through on the back side of the building that was next to the road there.
They didn't have a drive-through. They didn't have a menu board. They did have a drive-through window, which they did get a conditional use permit for.
Okay.
But they didn't have a menu board sign back there.
Okay.
Commissioner Schultz?
I have a question about the second portion of the sentence that says, "and allows for greater height limits for commercial monument signs." Is that
Oh.
general?
You want me to go to, did you have any more questions about this?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought,
This was part of the,
I think that's part of the,
Oh, this here.
okay,
Is that what you're talking about here?
again, yes.
yes.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's okay. I just didn't realize, so why would we want to raise that? I guess,
Raise the height limit for a commercial monument sign? Well, it's This was sort of an oversight when we created the UDC sign regulations. There are quite a few signs that, well, maybe I'll back up a minute. A monument sign lays flush with the ground. It doesn't have legs, so to speak, or it's not raised off the ground on poles, whereas a monument sign is flush with the ground.
Okay.
Tractor Center.
One way to think about it is, and this is why it occurred to us as staff, is so we allow one of these ugly highway-style signs on a stick to be 25 feet high. But if they wanted to build a pretty brick-lined landscape, monument sign, which the whole thing, is from ground to the top instead of on a pole, but that could only be 6 feet tall. Like, we want people to do nicer signage in crystal. And so if we're talking about a height limit, what does it matter whether it's on a pole or on an actual monument type structure? A monument structure would actually look better. So that's why they're still limited in how much of that monument can be the actual sign. So like the rest of it would be like brick or something nice, to get to wherever the sign is. It isn't like they could take the whole 25-foot tall monument and make it into an actual advertising sign. It would be a small part of that. So while it's unlikely anyone's ever going to do a 25-foot tall monument sign because it would be very expensive, they certainly more than 6 feet seem reasonable. And so we felt that, well, if we allow, again, those ugly old pole signs to be 25 feet high, then we should allow monument signs the same height limit. So that's the rationale behind it.
When I said there was an oversight when the UDC was created too, because prior to the UDC, we have monument signs that were approved by city staff because of the regulations that we had in effect before the UDC that allowed greater height for monument signs. There's one at the medical clinic.
Approve that, to change.
This is not the eye clinic, it's the existing medical clinic south of there. That one has a tall, I think it's 15 feet monument sign. There's also one at, there's an office building that faces Bass Lake Road. The address is 6000 Bass Lake Road. There's one there as well. It's not too far from the medical clinic. Those are two that come to mind.
Part of it is the old code defined, monument signs really are a type of freestanding sign, right? They're both, whether it's on a pole or it's, the whole thing goes down to the ground, it's a freestanding sign. It's not attached to a building. And that's the way the old code defined freestanding sign. Well, in the UDC, monument signs, for other reasons having to do with aesthetics, are defined differently. But they really are a type of freestanding sign. So that's the rationale for treating them the same.
Are we making sure that these freestanding signs don't block vision and things like that? Because I know the poles might be ugly, but at least you can see the street on the other side of the pole versus a monument sign, which, depending on how big that base of the monument is, can actually make it so you can't see around corners as easily.
They're subject to the visibility triangle requirements that we have in Chapter 8 of the City Code. Trying to think if there's anything else that would come into play.
Any further comments? Questions? Seeing none, no, I think we're at the end of our list.
That's the end of the list, yes.
Completed that section. Next is general information. City council action on previous planning commission items.
Yes, the variance at 4309 Colorado, that was approved as you recommended. That was for the single-family home that was formerly used as a duplex, and now it's becoming a duplex again,
Right.
without necessarily changing the footprint at this point. So.
Next is update from council liaison. Does councilperson Kaiser have anything?
You wanted to hear more about parking spaces before you said it, right?
Or trees, really. Couple things, the marijuana, the conversation at the last time we talked about it is, we're gonna at least temporarily ban it in public. You can't drink alcohol in public, you can't smoke marijuana in public is the thinking. And once the state office gets up and running, which is about a year and a half from now, that might be changed, but that was my understanding, that we all were pretty much in agreement on that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the last meeting, you had a lot of questions about the blue line, and I had a very informative meeting with Commissioner Lundy. He's our Hennepin County Commissioner, and he is willing to talk to anybody. I understand that people are concerned about the cost. I'm concerned about the cost. That being said, they're not anticipating the problems that they had with the Southwest. There is no tunnel, there is no unforeseen issues. The whole route, it hasn't been completely decided in Minneapolis, so it's pretty close. I think it'll go up Washington and cross 94 at 21st.
New
right?
bridge on 21st.
Right, and then it will go up Broadway all the way up. That's all county roads, so we don't have to worry about getting approval from BNSF. We don't have any of those issues because the route is all county-owned. Another thing I really took from that meeting with Lundy was, people are saying, why can't we do this with buses? He said, once you put 2 rails in the ground, the route is there. With Met Council, they cancel bus lines. It's been a while, I used to work downtown, I would take the bus down Douglas from my house downtown. That bus doesn't exist anymore. And so I liked what he said, that once you put it there, it's not moving. And he also told me this a while ago, that they're anticipating the growth of the metro area, about 50,000 more people between now and 2050. The time for infrastructure is now. So once the route is chosen, the federal government will kick in 49%. Another problem with the Southwest is you only get one shot at the federal money. So any overage or overcost or the tunnel that came up after the original design, that's all either paid for by Met Council and or the county or both, or they're fighting over who's paying for that. But so I think with this, I just feel a whole lot better because it's not going to have the problems the Southwest line had. So I thought I would share that with you. Any questions for me?
Any questions?
Did Lundy address any of the crime issues that we had brought up?
Yeah, that has come up. I've gone to a lot of Blue Line meetings. That comes up all the time. It's not looking like, the old model of getting people to and from downtown. That's really not what's happening with this. And it's more of a getting people where they need to be. So hopefully ridership will pick up. And there are some options out there, like they don't charge, they do charge, but they don't enforce it. So if they start enforcing people to actually buy a ticket and kick them off the train if they don't have one, I think that will help. That's one of the options, but it has come up several times. It comes up all the time, and it's not like it's not an issue, but we're a ways from that, and I feel good about where this is going. So, I don't know, that didn't really answer your question, but
We'll see what happens.
yeah, we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
You guys are much nicer to me than the last time.
Retired. Next is the review, like the agenda items for Monday, September 11th.
Sure,
Olson,
the application deadline is not until tomorrow. I have not received any applications yet. I'm not expecting any, so we'll see what happens tomorrow.
okay, next open forum.
Mr. Chair, before we move on from general info, I have a couple items.
Sure, Director Sutter.
Thank you. Adding on to Councilmember Kaiser's comments about the blue line, when you leave tonight, if you're curious, the scale model that was on display at the Frolics is now on kind of semi-permanent display on the back hall of City Hall. So if you go out this door, out past where the old police counter used to be, the scale model's there, and then some display boards based on the interchange option, which, while our city council won't be voting on municipal consent for about a year, clearly the interchange operation or option at Bass Lake Road is the option that the project, that means Hennepin County Metro Transit, prefers. So it's a very I don't want to say a safe assumption, but it's much more likely than not that that is the option they will choose to build there. And that's why they created the scale model. So if you want to see that, it's here, and it'll be during business hours here at City Hall indefinitely, I guess.
John, is that the option that has 81 lifted up over?
Yes.
That's like,
Yep.
thank you.
Correct.
There are also boards out there too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you may have seen those before, but they go along well with the interchange to help picture it, so. And the other thing, talking about safety, I rode my bike this weekend following the trail that parallels the existing blue line, sort of along Hiawatha. And this was kind of an epiphany to me, although it's kind of a well, duh kind of thing too. But activity at the stations, bad activity, uncomfortable, bad, whatever you want to call it, activity at stations is more a product of where the station's located and the neighborhood it's in than people necessarily getting on the train. Like, in other words, like if you ride your bike on the path that kind of goes right through the Franklin Avenue station, for example, yeah, it's bad. I mean, it's really bad, right? And then if you go down to the 38th Avenue station or the 46th Avenue station, down closer to Minnehaha Park, it's not. It's like any LRT station anywhere. At least that was my experience on Sunday. Just yesterday I did that. So I think while the safety concerns on the system are definitely a problem, the concerns about activities at the stations, I think, are more reflective of the communities that the stations are in, and not necessarily something that is brought into being because of the station. At least that was my takeaway from those observations.
Thank you. Next is open forum. Anybody have anything for?
Yeah, this would be for our commission,
Johnson.
our commission chair and our planner. Can we get Commissioner Lundy to come and speak to us about light rail? Perhaps for our city council member too.
He's more than willing to meet with people. I'll contact his office.
Or am I the only one who would like to hear him?
No?
Doesn't matter. Bring him anyway.
Okay. I'm not making any promises, but I will contact his office.
Commissioner Schultz.
I think it would be beneficial to hear from Commissioner Lundy as well, but maybe a little bit farther down the project before things get settled, for sure.
Yeah. Commissioner Hagel.
Let's see, what is it, October 11th, I believe, at the Crystal Community Center. The police force will be over there giving, I'd encourage people to go to that because, yeah, I think there's 3 communities that are going to be there. And they'll give you a good chance to ask questions and et cetera. So
I'm sorry, the police department will be giving what?
kind of a forum where they'll answer safety questions, new policy questions.
Ask a cop day, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
That's the cities of New Hope and Robbinsdale. They've done it before. It's actually very worthwhile. I think it's usually on a Saturday morning, but I've attended in the past, and I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah. And the other one, with the forester being no longer with Crystal, like in our neighborhood, we have a lot of dead trees that didn't make it from last winter. And the bark's falling off of them. They're on the boulevards. They can, at a later date, cause a problem. Now, has the city got any policy about trees that could cause a problem on the streets, on their streets? Like, we have trees overhanging in our block that garbage trucks are tearing apart because the limbs are down far enough that they catch them when they go under them.
And these are trees in the right of way, the boulevard?
Yeah, they're right. Well, they're within the 10 feet from back a face of curb. Do they have a policy?
Mr. Chair, I can answer that. I think, Commissioner, I think you should contact the Park Superintendent, Brad Fortin, who is in charge of managing the trees that are in the public right-of-way. A lot of that is, I mean, they don't have the staff to go out and be proactive, so they rely on reports and complaints. Otherwise, they won't know about it usually. So, I would encourage you to contact Brad Fortin in the Public Works Department.
You got a phone number for him?
763-531-1158, if I remember correctly.
So they don't have a policy like they did for Dutch elm or?
Oh, it depends on the tree. Okay, so if it's an ash tree that's got emerald ash borer.
Yeah.
Yeah, we order those removed all the time. On public property, we have to do it and pay for it out of public funds. If it's on private property, then we issue the private property owner an order saying you have to remove it, just like we've done for Dutch elm disease trees for decades. So the same thing is true for emerald ash borer. For other types of problems, like just poorly trimmed trees.
Well, these are trees that just died over the winter.
Do you happen to know if they're ash trees? I mean, Brad would know.
It could be any species of tree from spruce to oaks.
Okay.
That didn't make it through the winter.
Well, we are getting oaks that are starting to die from something else. I don't think it's like EAB.
It's oak wilt.
Yeah, but there are, so I would recommend you report any tree concerns to Brad Fortin, and he will investigate, and the plan of action will depend on, whose tree it is and what type of tree it is and what the reason for the problem is.
Okay.
Commissioner Schultz?
As I mentioned earlier, I've had a few arborists out at my house because of the dying oaks. Not a lot of oak wilt yet, and the red oaks it can be, but the white oaks and the bur oaks are dying from what's called two-line chestnut borer.
Okay.
It's a beetle, similar to what's attacking the ash trees, because they're susceptible and they're stressed because we've had 3 years of drought. So to prevent it, you water your trees, mulch underneath them, and you can get an injection to kill the beetle if you do have an oak.
Good cultural practice. Keep your tree watered.
Commissioner Marisani?
I was just wondering if you had the name and phone number of the New Hope one. I have a ash tree that I've been treating for a few years now, but I noticed some ash trees over in New Hope that are dead, and they need to be removed. And I was wondering who I could contact about that.
I do not know that, I'm sorry.
okay.
But yeah, I would just call New Hope City Hall
Yeah.
and I want to report some dead ash trees. I'm sure you wouldn't be the first.
Commissioner Brown?
Yeah, and is there any way that on what I call Dead Man Curve 2 down going towards Brooklyn Center, there's a big grove of trees there. Is there any way that we could somebody could get in there and get all the dead trees and dead vegetation out of there, so in case of something should happen that, like a fire, it wouldn't be fuel for it?
Are these trees in the public right-of-way? There's a big public right-of-way there because you've got, 56th if it continued straight, Orchard if it continued straight, and then the curve. It was almost like a big triangle of public right-of-way.
Yeah, the thing is that it's that some are in, some are leaning, and so on and so forth there.
I would ask you to, again, call Brad Fortin, the park superintendent. If the trees are in the public right-of-way, he will, well, again, start with him with any tree complaint. He's overwhelmed right now, but he'll get to it, put it on the list and check it out when he can. Certainly, trees that are in the public right-of-way, I mean, that's our responsibility as a city. So, it's a different priority level than trying to deal with something that's on private property. But, yeah, he will go out and look at them firsthand if you make a complaint directly to him.
Any other comments, questions? Now we're open for adjournment. We make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Oh, sorry.
Second. No, just kidding.
Second.
Just kidding.
I wanted to mention that around 5 o'clock today, we did receive the court decision in the second lawsuit regarding the two-family dwelling that was built at 6613 36th Avenue. The court ruled in the city's favor. Pretty, I don't know what the right word is, pretty, well, of course it was decisively, but I mean, yes, they ruled in the city's favor. So the neighbor who filed the suit has 60 days to appeal to the Minnesota Court of Appeals if they choose to do so. I have no idea whether they will, but the city did prevail in district court in that lawsuit, and the lawsuit was challenging our issuance of a building permit for the two-family dwelling. The real quick summary from the judge is the property is a lot of record and a buildable lot. The duplex is a permitted use of the property. And that's it. That's really the reason. So just wanted you all to know that because I think we've been asked before what the status of that is.
Yes. The plaintiff had argued that the lot was unbuildable and that the building should be torn down and nothing should ever be built there.
Okay.
Thanks for the info.
Thank you.
Any other questions, concern? Not for, open for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Johnson makes a motion, second. Commissioner Brown. All in favor, say aye. Aye. No, explain yourself.
I'm sorry, who was the one who made the motion?
Johnson.
Johnson.
Second, Brown.
Okay.
And
What time?
clock reads 8:27. Thank you for coming.